me to begin?
Actually, Deepak will start with
Very
his
good.
introduction, and then thereafter, after his introduction and welcome is complete, he will invite you to speak.
Very good. Thank you.
Respected guest speaker, friends and participants, Namaskar. On behalf of Nivaran, I extend a very, very warm good evening to our foreign guests and late evening to our Indian guests. Today is the 10th lecture organized by Nivaran. Nivaran phonetically and meaning-wise means resolution. Nivaran is a group of mediators in the Honorable Supreme Court of India and organizes very, very methodically development of the process of mediation. Nivaran has already organized from 2020 onwards regular lecture series, and today we are at the threshold of 10th lecture. Nivaran has also organized 3 international seminars, 2 summer schools, and I think we are proud to inform that the last summer school was inaugurated by Honorable Chief Justice of India, who is also a very devout promoter of the mediation process. Before I start the introduction of the speaker and the topic, I will just tell a few things about the structure of the meeting. Once the speaker initiates the discussion, he is going to be allowed for 45 minutes speech. He will speak to us around up to 9:45. Thereafter, for 20 minutes here and there, and question and answer from the participants, which will be collated by us, and we will try to answer the same in the most practical manner. As I told already, this is the 10th lecture series of Nivaran. This topic today is how to design, organize, and facilitate dialogues over difficult, divisive, and dangerous issues. I will now touch upon a small who is who about the speaker. Nivaran has collected the details about the speaker to the extent possible. And even at that stage, it looks formidable. I'll be taking a little bit more time to tell your biodata. It's so much. I think it would have been better if I would have been asked to say what is not there. Everything in the mediation, everything concerning the art of mediation and the institutional recognitions are there. I start about the speaker introduction. Kenneth Cloak, as he has already permitted us to address him as Ken, is director of the Center for Dispute Resolution and a mediator, arbitrator, facilitator, coach, consultant, and trainer, specializing in communication, negotiation, and resolving complete multi-party dispute. collective bargaining negotiations, organizational and school conflicts, sexual harassment, discrimination, and public policy disputes, and designing, preventing conflict resolution systems. So, Ken, I'm not wrong. Nothing is left out. You are specialized everything. His facilitation, coaching, consulting, and training practice includes work with leaders of public, private, and non-profit organizations on effective communications, dialogue, collaborative negotiation, relationship, and team building, conflict resolution, leadership, development, strategic planning, designing system, culture, and organizational change. Coming back to the recognitions of Mr. Pluk or Ken, he is an internationally recognized speaker and author of Mediation, Revenge, and the Magic of Forgiveness, Mediating Dangerously, The Frontiers of Conflict Resolutions, The Crossroads of Conflicts, A Journey into the Heart of Dispute Resolution, Conflict Revolution, First and Second Edition, and The Dance of Opposites, Explorations in Mediation, Dialogue, and Conflict Resolution Systems, Design, Politics, Dialogue, and the Evolution of Democracy, Words of Wisdom, and co-author with John Goldsmith of Thank God It's Monday, 14 Values We Need to Humanize the Way We Work, Resolving Personal and Organizational Conflict, The End of Management, and the Rise of Organizational Democracy, The Art of Working People Up, Cultivating Awareness and Authenticity at Work, and Resolving Conflicts at Work, 10 Strategies for Everyone on the Job, First and Third Instant. Ken, it's all right? Okay. His university teaching includes mediation law, history, political science, conflict studies, urban studies, and other topics at several colleges and universities. He is or has recently been an adjunct professor at Pepperdine University School of Law, Southern Methodist University, USC Global Negotiation Insight Institute at Harvard Law School, Omega Institute, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, Cape Cod Institute, University of Amsterdam, ADR Institute, Saybrook University, Massey University, New Zealand. He has done conflict resolution work in Armenia, Australia, Austria, Bahamas, Brazil, Canada, China, Cuba, Denmark, England, Georgia, Greece, India, Ireland, Japan, Mexico, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nicaragua, Pakistan, Puerto Rico, Scotland, Slovenia, Spain, Thailand, Turkey, Ukraine, USSR, and Zimbabwe. He is founder and first president of Mediators Beyond Borders. Having said all these things, he served as an administrative law judge for the California Agricultural Labor Relations Board and the Public Employment Relations Board, a fact finder for the Public Employment Relations Board, and a judge pro tem for the Superior Court of Los Angeles. He has been an arbitrator and mediator for over 40 years in labor management disputes, and is a member of a number of arbitration panels. He received his BA from the University of California, Berkeley, JD, from UC Berkeley, from Bolt Law School, PhD from UCLA, LLM from UCLA Law School, and did postdoctoral work at Yale University School of Law. He is a graduate of the National Judicial College and has taken graduate level courses in a variety of subjects. So, friends and gentlemen, you are going to hear this gentleman, and you just see that the speech will be pregnant with so many things, and you have to give all the attention you can give and attend the lectures properly. Now about the topic. As I said, the discussion will mainly veer around the main topic is how to design, organize facilities, dialogues over difficult, divisive, and dangerous issues. At the beginning, I just want to say that there are two aspects of the subject matter. One is the issues, and another is the dialogue. The speaker wants to frame the speech in the way he likes, but what we think about is that how do we talk to each other about difficult, divisive, and dangerous issues? How do we exercise our responsibility as citizens without losing what we have learned as mediators, negotiators, and conflict regulators, resolvers? How do we advocate for what we believe in without becoming biased and adversarial? What are interest-based forms of conversation and discourse? What higher order skills do we require for democracy in work? How do we design, organize, and facilitate dialogues and meaningful discussions of highly contentious, value-based topics without degenerating into discussions of politeness and diatribes? What are the limits of collaboration and mediation in conflict? How do we respond democratically and humanly to authoritarian and inhuman actions? How do we build trust between adversaries in different and difficult circumstances where time is limited, history is long, and positions have hardened? What can interest-based approaches to conflict teach us about hot political conflicts? What is politics and what are the components of political conflict? So many questions, so few answers. Yet, ones will seek to answer. Can, with all these heavy expectations of ours, the topic, what we understand the way we have stated, you are coming before us as a savior to eliminate our confusions and doubts. And at the same time, I think whole international community will appreciate, are bothered and much sad about the ways things are going. Sometime right in our own country, sometime in our neighbors, and sometime whole worldwide. We have the problems of immigrants, refugees, and other things. I will not venture into your area of thinking, but I just said all these things and all these areas just to magnify our emotions with what we listen to you. Thank you. Over to Ken.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you all very much for staying up tonight.
Yes, I can be shortened as the DIP.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes. At this,
Very
I can
good.
hear you all right.
Let's begin with a couple of ideas about the nature of conflict resolution and this project that we are embarked on. And let's begin at a very simple level with three philosophical assumptions. One, no two people are alike. Two, no single person is the same from one moment to the next. And three, conflicts are complex, multifaceted, multidimensional, intricate, subtle, and deep. And if we combine these three together, the outcome is that I can't teach you how to resolve conflicts, nor can anyone. And whatever technique you adopt at 9:30 may be successful at 9:30 and a complete failure at 9:35. What then do we do? And the answer is we experience the conflict at a deep level inside of ourselves that allows the conflict to open up, that invites people into that deeper understanding, not only of what the conflict is about, but what it means to them at a fundamental level. Let me say this in a slightly different way. If we ask the question, where are conflicts located? We will come up with three essential answers. First, every conflict is located inside of us. We experience it internally. Second, every conflict has a relational aspect. That is, it exists between us. And third, every conflict also exists around us in the form of a conflicted environment, conflicted systems, and conflicts within cultures that divide us. And if conflicts exist in all of these places, it's clear that the resolution process also has to enter these places. If we ask the question, what is mediation? The answer has to be that it is an operation that we perform on a conflict in order to be able to move it in the direction of resolution. And what does that mean? It means finding the place where people are stuck. And it is possible for us, on the basis of experience, like the 40 years of experience that Deepak mentioned that I have had in resolving disputes at various levels and in many, many different countries and many different environments. But each conflict is fundamentally different from the one before. And if I think that I have the answer, I've just lost it. So what is important for us is to begin with the idea that we have no idea what is going on. And then what will happen is we will become present in a way that we otherwise are not. Carl Jung, a very famous psychoanalyst, said that in the course of his life, he had analyzed over 80,000 dreams. And every dream he heard, he had to forget all 80,000. And in a similar way, in the presence of people who are in conflict, we have to forget what we already know, because it's only out of that forgetting that we will listen at a deep level to what people are actually saying. Let's go back to this first location of conflict. That is, that conflicts are located inside of us. Where exactly are they located? Well, here I think it's quite clear that they are located in our physical bodies. And if they are in our physical bodies, it is possible for us to address the conflict in that location. How do we do that? By bringing people into each other's presence, by speaking softly, by approaching them in a kind of nonviolent way, by listening. And this releases some of the stress, some of the physical stress that people are experiencing. We also experience conflicts mentally as disagreements. And what we want to then do is to explore those disagreements within their mental location. How do we do that? By analyzing the issues, by asking questions that reveal what happened and how it took place, and the possibility that some alternative way for things to happen might emerge. Third, conflicts take place emotionally. And what distinguishes a conflict from a disagreement is the presence of some intense negative emotion. Otherwise, it's simply mental and perhaps physical. But once it becomes emotional, this is the place where people become seriously stuck. So how do we address emotions? And the answer is we invite them to surface themselves. We acknowledge them. We listen to them. We help people complete them. But conflicts also arise in a more difficult area, one that is hard to describe. And we will call this a spiritual location of conflict, although the word spiritual has many connotations to it, and is often a source of confusion. But if we say that one element of conflict is the inability to let go of what happened to us, then we can say that conflict is a form of attachment. And if conflict is a form of attachment, what are some of the ways in which it is possible for people to let go? And the final place that I would like to mention is that I believe that conflicts exist also in a heart location, in the place where we have an open heart or a closed heart, the place in which we are able to be present with people in an open-hearted way, or ways in which we shut ourselves off internally from caring. And if this is the case, then what we want to do is to help people have conversations that allow them to care about each other or return to a place of caring. Now, the question is then, how exactly do these things take place? Well, if we think of mediation from a transactional point of view, the orientation is towards agreement. We want to come up with a set of agreements between people that help them move on from their conflict. But what prevents them from reaching agreement? And the answer, in part, is the inability to address conflicts in each of those deeper locations. So how do we do that? And I think that the answer is through dialogue. So Freud once described psychoanalysis as the talking cure. And we can describe mediation as the listening cure, but I think it makes more sense to describe it as the dialogue cure. That is, the place where people both talk and listen to each other in sequence. That is, where the relationship between people moves from monologue to dialogue. And of course, virtually everyone in conflict engages in monologues. They are all just telling stories about what happened to them without really listening to what the other person what has happened to them. So the question is then, how do we design a dialogue that allows people to speak to each other at these deeper levels? Let me give you a concrete and specific example. And this is one that I use in family mediations. But you can use them in other mediations as well. There's a slight variation that you would use. And it consists of a set of questions. And there are 5 basic questions as a part of this series. Question 1, what words would you use to describe the kind of family you most want to have? Each person answers this question. And somebody says, I want a family that is respectful. Guess what? That one feels disrespected. I want a family that's caring. That one feels uncared for. I want a family that's honest. That one feels lied to. Second question, does anybody disagree with any of those words? Does anybody want a family that isn't caring, that isn't respectful, that isn't honest? Nobody ever raises their hand. So then I say, congratulations, you've reached consensus. This is the kind of family you want to have. You want a family that is honest and caring and respectful. So now comes question 3. Are each of you prepared right now in this conversation to begin living up to those words? Are you willing to commit in this conversation to being as respectful and as caring and as honest as you can? And everyone says yes. Question 4. Do each of us have permission to stop the conversation if we begin moving away from those words? Everybody says yes. And now let's return to the conversation and ask this question. What has happened in your family that has made that word that you mentioned feel like it doesn't exist? What's made that word important to you, of value to you? What has happened that has made you believe that that does not exist in your family? And now we have a fundamentally different kind of conversation. What has happened? We have gone from he did this and she did that, and this one said this and the other one said that, to why is that important to you? There are other ways of getting to the same place, particularly in dialogues, and I've done quite a number of these in different countries and in different locations with different groups of people, including political dialogues. And one of the things that happens in political dialogues is that people give speeches to one another and nobody is listening. After the first couple of words, and you have labeled the other person as a member of this party or that party, or this faction or that faction, or supporting this person or that person, as soon as you've been able to label them, listening stops. So how do you create listening? And the answer is you have to ask a question that takes people away from those judgments and biases into a place where there are multiple answers. Here's one of those questions. And instead of asking someone what they agree or disagree about, try asking this question. What life experiences have you had that they've led you to feel so passionately about this issue? What has happened in your life that has made you so concerned with this issue? And now what you're going to get is a story. And with the story, empathy will be elicited in the listener, hopefully, if we've done it correctly. Here's another example. I organized a dialogue in Athens, which took place over a period of 4 years. Each year, we had multiple dialogues, and the object was to train mediators in Athens in how to conduct dialogues. And the dialogues were between Greek citizens and immigrants, which we all know is a very hot issue in Greece. And so in the dialogues were over 100 Greek citizens and immigrants from all countries and all different surroundings. And the question is, how do we get these people to talk to one another in a way that opens the conversation for listening? Here are the first 2 questions we asked each person to answer in small groups. And we'll talk a little bit about the techniques of dialogue. And one of those key techniques is breaking people down into small groups where they can have conversations with one another rather than in a large group where only 1 or 2 people are able to speak. Here are the 2 opening questions. Question 1, have you personally in your life, in a family or a neighborhood or a school or a workplace, ever been the new one and everybody else has been there for a long time? and they all know how things should be run, what should happen, how things work. What did that feel like? How were you treated? What happened to you? Can you tell a story about what it felt like to be the new one? Question 2, have you ever in your life, in a family or a neighborhood or a school or a workplace, been the one who's been there for a while, and now all these new people are coming in and changing everything? What did that feel like? How were you treated? What happened to you? And once again, we get stories, but notice now, instead of people giving speeches, they're telling stories about what has happened to them. And in those stories is the possibility of understanding the human being who is present at some deeper level. And out of that comes the possibility of dialogue. But it's deeper than this. And in order to capture the depth, what I would like to do is to give you basically 2 quotations which are in the materials. And if it's all right with you, I'll just share my screen here for a moment. Okay, so there we go. The first of these quotations is by Jiddu Krishnamurti. Let's see if this will come up here. Oops. Have I lost you? Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Ah, good. Okay, thank you. So the first of these quotations from Krishnamurti is quite nice. He says, oops, I have to go back here. A dialogue is very important. It is a form of communication in which question and answer continue until a question is left without an answer. Thus, the question is suspended between the 2 persons involved in this answer and question. It is like a bud with untouched blossoms. If the question is left totally untouched by thought, it then has its own answer, because the questioner and answerer as persons have disappeared. This is a form of dialogue in which investigation reaches a certain point of intensity and depth, which then has a quality that thought can never reach. And this is what takes place beneath the dialogue, when we have designed a question that draws people into what is really fundamental and important to them, not the superficial issues, but the deeper ones that really matter to them. And finally, from Elie Wiesel, brilliant statement. We are all partners in a quest. The essential questions have no answers. You are my question, and I am yours. And then there is dialogue. The moment we have answers, there is no dialogue. Questions unite people, answers divide them. So why have answers when you can live without them? So these 2 really brilliant statements are designed to refocus us on what it is that is actually taking place beneath the surface of the dialogue. And I wanted to start with this because in designing the dialogue, we want to come from a place of understanding how great it can be, how brilliant, how beautiful, how magical it can actually be. And I say this having conducted dialogues between Israelis and Palestinians, Georgians and Ukrainians and Russians, between Azerbaijanis and Armenians, Sandinistas and members of the political opposition, lots and lots of different kinds of dialogues at a very large kind of political level, but also all the way down to individual conversations between married couples over not just who is responsible for doing some piece of work around the house, but why that's important to you, what it means to you. So let me give you an example of a small scale dialogue in a marriage, a married couple, in a mediation that I did recently. I do a fair amount of marital mediations, which I know you're not doing, but the goal of this is to describe what this consists of. This is a couple that was having difficulty with their marriage, and they came in to talk about it. And we had a very good session, a very interesting conversation, and then they came back for a second session. And at the beginning of the second session, I asked this question: how has it been since our first session? I wanted to see if anything had shifted. He said, great. She said, horrible. Okay, so you can't go with great after someone has said horrible. So I said, okay, what made it horrible for you, to her? And she said, well, just this morning, on our way to come and see you, he left his dirty clothes on the floor. And he goes, oh, I can't believe that you're saying this. And then they start having this conversation. It gets into an argument, and she says, that's just like you to say that. And he says, well, you're so critical all the time. And now they're off and running. So I try to stop the conversation. First of all, I let it go for a while to see what happens, because it's important to watch how things break, how they fall apart. And in doing that, you can discover where the cracks are located. And what conflict, I have a shorthand definition of conflict, which is simply that it is the sound made by the cracks in a system. So then I let it go, and then I asked a question of her. And the question, because clearly we have this situation, there is an intense amount of emotion around this issue. And what is the issue? It's some dirty clothes on the floor. And those two things do not equal each other, except we have to make the assumption that they actually do equal each other. And therefore, I have to ask a question to reveal that. And here's my question. What did it mean to you that he left his dirty clothes on the floor? She said, it means he doesn't respect me. Okay, and that now we can start to see that this is a good reason for the intense emotion on her part around the dirty clothes on the floor. But it's not quite enough for me, as I am empathizing with her. In other words, I have to find her inside of me through empathy. And if I do that, I realize there's a deeper question. And so I ask the deeper question. The deeper question is this: what does it mean to you that he doesn't respect you? And she says, it means he doesn't love me. Okay, so now we have a much deeper place that we have gone in this conversation, something much more fundamental than the dirty clothes on the floor. Disrespect is deeper, and he doesn't love me is deeper still. And now we're at a place where I turn to him and I ask him this question: is that right? Do you not love her? Because she's taken a risk in asking this question. She deserves an honest answer. And in order to get the honest answer, I have to give him permission to say, that's right, I don't love her. And then we're in a completely different conversation. But he says, no, I do love her. And he's telling me, and I say, stop, don't tell me, tell her. So he turns to her and he says, I do love you. And now, isn't this the conversation that she's been waiting for the whole time? And now they're having this really nice conversation between the two of them, about very loving, very caring conversation between the two of them. But we're not yet completely done with this issue. So I go back to it and I say to her, what is going to happen to the dirty clothes on the floor? And she says, I'm going to pick them up and clean them. And I say, why? And she says, because I'm supposed to. And I said, who says? And she says, I say. And I said, where did that message come from? And she says, from my mother and my grandmother, and basically from all the other women in my life who are telling me that this is what I am supposed to do. And now let's go back to the idea of disrespect. Of course, it makes sense that his leaving his dirty clothes on the floor is disrespectful, because if he respected her, he would understand that she would feel that it was her job to pick up the dirty clothes. She's already doing a lot of work, and it is disrespectful to her to add to her work when he could, through some small effort on his part, make her life a little bit easier. And doesn't that mean that he really doesn't love her? Because if he loved her, he would understand, without her ever having to say anything, that this is how she felt. So what we have here is a set of assumptions. What we have is a kind of marital conflict culture in which there are a set of meanings and assumptions and expectations, none of which have been discussed, none of which have been negotiated, and most of which the other person is completely unaware of. So now, the point of this is, how do we get now this conversation moving? And so I ask him a question: are there things like that for you that you feel responsible for, and that maybe she's not helping in what she's doing? And he says, yes, absolutely. And now we begin the real conversation, which is, what kind of life do we want to have together? And how are we going to make it work between the two of us? What are the things that, that we need to negotiate between the two of us in order to make this relationship work? So this is an example of the fundamental piece of conflict resolution that has dialogue at its core, which is the exploration of meaning. Dialogue was defined by a very famous physicist whose name is David Bohm, B-O-H-M, who was one of the top 20 physicists of the 20th century, along with Einstein and Heisenberg and Schrodinger and all of the others. But later in his life, he became interested in dialogue, and he wrote a very wonderful, very short book called On Dialogue, in which he defines dialogue as the flow of meaning, or the stream of meaning that flows between us. So this is what we essentially are trying to create in the form of dialogue. How do we allow meaning to flow as a stream between people, an unobstructed stream? So conflict then is simply obstacles in the middle of the stream. It's a big rock in the center of the stream that is diverting the water from flowing freely. And what we want to do is to identify that rock and then remove it, or help them identify it and remove it. So how exactly do we do this? Well, I've been talking about individual cases and about large-scale political cases, but it's also important in organizational and community conflicts to figure out how to organize dialogues. The materials that I have sent to you, I give to you. You are welcome to them. They now belong to you. And they are an effort to describe in detail how exactly to do this. But I'd like to give you a couple of examples that are not in the materials, because I think you can read the materials and take them and learn from them and adapt them to Indian conditions or to conditions wherever you may happen to be located. They will be different for different cultures. And India, as I know you know better than I do, is possibly an infinite number of cultures. So many cultures, it's difficult even to keep track. And so what we want to do is to figure out how to create a collaborative design process that draws people into the design of their own dialogues. How do we do this? By bringing dialogue into the dialogue designing process. So for example, when I went to Athens to work with the Greek mediators, first I met with the Greek mediators to find out, because this dialogue has to take place in Greek, what are the ways in which Greeks talk about issues successfully, and what are the ways that those conversations fall apart. And I call this the elicitive method, because we want to elicit from within every culture what works and where things begin to fall apart. And sometimes those take the form of stories. The very famous Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, wrote, and this is pretty much a quote, if it were not for the story, our children would be bumping into cactus plants and falling into ditches. So it is out of conflict stories that we discover some of the elements of culture and how to create, how to design a dialogue that works. Here are a couple of ways of doing this that work in the cultures that I work in. If we take a look at large group multi-stakeholder processes, environmental disputes, for example, of which I have mediated a number, corporate disputes, large-scale business-to-business conflicts, community conflicts. What happens is that you have multiple stakeholders. Everybody has an interest in the outcome, but everybody's approach to it is fundamentally different. How do we bring these people together? And my approach to this is to begin by inviting individuals who are in the leadership of those organizations or are active in those groups to volunteer to be trained as dialogue facilitators, so that we begin with a training. In Athens, this consisted of bringing Greek lawyers together for a week to learn how to facilitate, going through some of these materials, teaching them step by step. How do you do this? And then helping them redesign the process. So we came up with a set of draft questions and then say, do these questions make any sense in Greek culture, in the culture of the immigrants? And we now have lawyers who are facilitators and immigrants who are facilitators. And then what we did was to design a process in which the first step is what is called convening. And convening means, first, who's invited to participate? And here you want to invite two groups. One, whoever it is who can help solve the problem. And second, whoever it is who can prevent the problem from being solved. This, of course, raises difficult issues. And the more polarized the environment, the higher the level of skill that is required in order to facilitate that kind of dialogue. But then the convening process consists of agreeing on ground rules. And I'm sure that you are all familiar with ground rules and the process of developing them. It's a little bit different in a complex multi-party situation because it takes a little bit longer to go around to each group separately and get their consensus or their agreement on what they need to have happen in order for the conversation to be successful. But once again, that itself is a mediation. And in that mediation, there is dialogue. So we are mediating our way into the mediation. We are dialoguing our way into the dialogue. And then what we do is we bring people together for a kind of orientation. But it's one that is about the ground rules and about how we're going to operate. Most of the work needs to be done in small groups because these give people an opportunity to speak directly to one another. It prevents political grandstanding, and it creates an environment in which people feel safe sharing what is difficult or dangerous for them. And then what we want to do, Deepak mentioned the title, looking at dialogue over difficult, divisive, and dangerous issues. Let me say a word about the danger here. The German writer Goethe wrote that the dangers in life are infinite, and among them is safety. So when does safety become dangerous? And the answer is when people are in conflict and you don't say anything about it because you're afraid that it's going to get worse. Or rather, to put it more in a little bit more advanced way, because you lack the skills to be able to handle the conversation that is about to emerge. And because we lack those skills, we don't open the issue up. And because we don't open it up, it becomes worse. What happens to a conflict that you ignore? What happens to an emotion that is suppressed, that nobody pays attention to? And the answer is, it doesn't go away. It just reorganizes and comes out somewhere else that's irrational. And so what we want to do is to create a kind of rational emotionality, a kind of level of permission for people to talk about what's important to them. And that happens in small groups. Here is one way of creating those small groups in situations where it is very difficult. And here I think I'm starting to run up against my 45 minutes. Deepak, if you can tell me kind of if I'm going over here a little bit. You're muted, Deepak. You're on mute. Well, I'll just assume that you can send me a text or a chat. Oh, there you are. Now you're unmuted.
Yes.
Am I approaching the limit of my 45 minutes?
You are, but then you can take time, no problem.
Okay, so I'll just take 1 minute to say this. Here is an example of something that you can do in a situation where it's very difficult for people to come forward with what the issues are. If you give people a piece of paper and a pencil or pen and ask them to write down the top 3 to 5 problems that they are having in their relationship with the other person. And in a large group setting, you can then take those from one group of people and give them to a different group. and from that group and give them to some different group. So that now the pieces of paper that people have were written by somebody else. It's not their problem anymore, it's someone else's. And then you ask them to meet in small groups, break them up into groups of 5 or 6 or 7, and ask them to prioritize the top 3 to 5 problems that these people have in common and report them out to the group as a whole. So everyone gets to hear what the outcome was in your small group. And then you synthesize those from all the small groups and identify the core problems that people need to work on. And once again, you divide people up into small groups, this time to brainstorm solutions to each of those problems and report out on the ideas that they came up with, the recommendations, the suggestions. We can even do this in individual mediations by asking people to write down 3 to 5 possible solutions that they can think of that they believe might be acceptable to the other side. And then report those out. And then what we want to do is to figure out a way of going through those and trying to implement them as best we can. There are 3 fundamental forms of dialogue. These are, first of all, empathy building dialogues, in which the goal is simply to have conversations with the other person in which they become real and human. Second, problem-solving dialogues, where the goal is to jointly tackle the problem. And the third that I like to use is a kind of combination of those previous 2, where we start with empathy building and then we move into problem solving. And the problem solving piece, I don't think is going to be very difficult for you. All of this is outlined, I think, in the materials. Let me say a final piece before opening this up for questions and comments and difficulties and disagreements. There is something magical that happens when people become open and honest and authentic with each other. And it is that magic that is a part of what makes mediation so exciting, so powerful an experience. When you see this happen, when you have people who have hated each other and fought with each other for years, and all of a sudden they reach an agreement, where did that come from? How did that magic happen? What is magic anyway? And the answer is, it's a shift in perspective. And what causes us to shift our perspective, our attitude? And the answer is, I believe, the insights that we gain by discovering what this looks like to another person. So conflict is a kind of blindness that is created by a lack of perspective. And as soon as we gain the perspective of the mediator or the other party or whoever, we are then able to look at the problem in a different way. And that's fundamentally what we want. There are a couple of questions in the chats. Let me just indicate that I'm assuming that the organizers of this conversation will send copies of the PowerPoint slides to everyone. If you would like to write your questions in the chat, we can take a few minutes to do that. How much time do we have, Deepak, for questions? When is this supposed to end?
We have kept around 10 minutes and then 5 minutes for the close up. So
Thank you.
At IST, we would like to finish by 10:50. Santan Krishnan, is it all right?
Yes.
Questions can be for about 20 minutes.
I beg your pardon?
Yes.
Thank you very much for such an illuminating discussion. And I must say, whatever write-ups we have got from you and whatever you have stated, just to have a preliminary digestion of the same, it will take days for us together. I will start my questioning to you, Mr. Ken. with the quote you quoted yourself in the first page of your write-up by Weiser. What attracted me is that he said the moment we have answers, there is no dialogue. Questions unite people, answers divide them. So why have answers when you can live without them? What is the moral of this quote? That you don't allow people to answer, or you have the questions and you answer yourself.
There's another program that I do, which is called The Art of Asking Questions. And the goal of the question is evolutionary. Or to put it slightly differently, it is to allow for learning and for growth as a result of not assuming that there is a single answer that is true for all time. So what this means is that the important thing is to live in the questions. And if I can put it slightly differently, here is a question that I will sometimes ask. I will mention this to this group of people. There are three questions that I could ask, three categories of questions I could ask everyone on this call. Category one, who is the oldest person on this call? Who's the youngest? Who's the tallest? Who's the shortest? Who lives the closest to Paris? Who lives the farthest away? And notice there's a single correct answer for everyone. Category of question two, how old are you? How tall are you? Where do you live? Now there's a single correct answer for each person. Category three, what issues are you facing at whatever age you are at? What does your height mean to you? What did it mean to you when you were growing up? What do you love about where you live? What do you not love about where you live? And now notice there are multiple correct answers for each person. And those answers evolve. And what allows them to evolve is our refusal to hold on to what we believe to be correct, and our willingness to learn that there may be something more correct that lies just beyond our view. I was asked by a political organization in the United States during the primary elections to assist their organizers in conducting dialogues between people who supported Bernie Sanders for president of the United States, people who supported Elizabeth Warren, people who supported Joe Biden. And what happened was when they would come into conversation with each other, as soon as you said the word Bernie or Elizabeth or Joe, all conversation stopped. You immediately knew who was right, who was wrong, and there was no point in talking anymore. So what was important was to ask a question that couldn't be answered so simply. And here was one of those questions. Here are two of them together. Question one.
Thank you.
What?
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, without
Now,
you can.
Now
Yes, please
over
go ahead.
to Asha for
Yeah.
her question. Then I'll come back again with my second question. At this moment, I'll say there is a flood of queries to us through chat box and otherwise WhatsApp. So it may not be possible for us to answer and reply to the questions we receive, but I think on behalf of Nivaran, I can give a promise that all these questions will be looked into, and whatever replies we are supposed to give may be given at a later date. To Asha.
And there is a question from one Swapna, where we can expect mediators will be in future and about their role in the society. What future holds for mediators?
Excellent, beautiful, profound, difficult question. And I believe the answer is this. The problems that we are now facing as a species on the planet can no longer be solved through military force or through litigation, but require the collaborative efforts of people in multiple countries. Even the nation state, which is the single most powerful problem-solving institution in history, cannot stop global warming by itself. We can't stop species extinctions. We can't stop the pandemic and the Delta virus from killing people unless we cooperate with one another. What do we need in order to create global cooperation? The answer is we need informal problem solving, collaborative negotiation, dialogue, and most importantly, we need mediation for when those don't work. And we need those processes to be built into the mediation process. As an illustration, the Kyoto Climate Change Agreement calls for conciliation if nations disagree about climate change targets. But conciliation is a process that goes through the International Court of Justice and takes up to 10 years. We don't have time for that. What we need to do instead is to sit down and talk to one another. And having been present at the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference and speaking at one of the panels in the Glasgow conference coming up in November, I can tell you that we are a long, long way from being able to collaborate in solving those problems. And people are dying, and more people will die as a result. What is the future for mediation? It is the redesign of political, social, and economic systems to include interest-based options rather than just power-based options or rights-based options, as in the case of litigation. So this is why I wrote a book called Conflict Revolution, because I believe that what we are talking about with mediation fundamentally is a complete revision of the way that we address conflicts on all scales, from the individual to the global. So I believe that the future of mediation is incredibly important and bright, and each of you in all of the work that you are doing is helping to move that global future for mediation forward. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Ken. And then I have a very interesting question from one of the participants, Madam Bharti Rao. I am quoting the question. What Locke spoke of attachment leading to conflict. Could he tell us a bit more? What do you do in such a situation? Unquote. Can you to answer?
I didn't hear all of the question, Deepak. Can you say it again?
I will. Ken spoke of attachment leading to conflict. Did you hear it?
I spoke of what? Leading to what?
Attachment.
Attachment, yes.
Attachment leading to conflict. Could he tell us a bit more? What do we do in such a situation?
Very nice. If we ask the question, what word would we use to describe the act of letting go, of completely letting go of our attachment to the conflicts in our lives? The answer is forgiveness. And then the question becomes, how do we forgive things that have happened to us? Well, the first thing that has to happen is we have to stop them from continuing to happen, meaning there has to be a mediation session. But the second thing that happens is that we have to explore the sources of attachment inside of ourselves. What is it that leads us to become attached? Where does that attachment actually take place? And what can we do to reverse that process? And basically what I believe that consists of is, first, not what we say in the United States, forgive and forget, but instead remember, and then try to figure out how to release yourself from that memory. How do we do that? Well, the first step is to try to reclaim empathy. Well, I'll say it a little differently. Here are the 5 steps in the forgiveness process, very stripped down. 1, remember what happened and how it felt. 2, imagine as vividly as you can what must have happened for the other person and how that must have felt. Why? Because the first casualty in every conflict is empathy. So we need to reclaim our capacity to find that person inside of ourselves. 3rd, identify all the reasons you can think of for not forgiving them. Because this is not a trivial act. It's something that has meaning. So we need to understand that there are very good reasons for not forgiving them. I have a shorthand definition of mediation, of forgiveness, which is releasing yourself from the burden of your own false expectations. So we also need to identify what our expectations were of the other person that they did not meet. Step 5 is in 2 parts. Part 1, decide to release yourself from each of those reasons and expectations if you can. And secondly, if you can't, identify what it's going to cost you to hold on to them. And this is the fundamental question. This is the one that will make a difference for you. What is it going to cost you to hold on to this conflict? And I'll tell you what the answer is. It's going to cost you your life. Some part of your life. Because your life energy is invested in something that is over and someone who is not friendly to you, or however you want to put it. So what you have to fundamentally decide is, are you going to reclaim your life energy for your future and your present? Or are you going to spend it continuing to work over something that has happened in the past that is completely stuck? There's a writer in the United States whose name is Henry David Thoreau. And he wrote, "The price of anything is the amount of life you pay for it." And I believe this is true with conflict. And then what we have to do is to design and execute a ritual of release, completion, and closure. A declaration that this is over for me. However you want to do that. And the fundamental way that conflict is over for us is in the form of learning what it is that that conflict took place in order to teach us. And this is the difficult part. Every conflict in our lives takes place because of I'll say it this way, takes place at a crossroads, using the title of one of my books, that is defined on the one hand by a problem we are now required to solve, and on the other hand, by the fact that we do not yet have the skills we need in order to solve it. What is conflict? It's just a lack of skill at being able to handle a particular problem or a particular person. Because once we have that skill, it isn't a conflict for us anymore. And the learning of that skill is a kind of essential element in forgiveness. So part of what we want to ask is, what is this conflict asking me to learn? And we can even ask that as a question. That's a dangerous question to ask in mediation, but it is a possible question. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you again. Now to second question from Asha.
Yes. And there's a question from Abhijit Kumar Gangopadhyay. He has asked, how can dialogue contribute in criminal cases and national and international commercial mediation to develop our macroeconomic system? Please analyze.
Very good. Well, again, a very, very nice question. The difficulty is that we, here's, I think, the way we have to think about this. Here's another definition of conflict, one that I gave you a little bit of before. Conflict is the sound made by the cracks in a system. A belief system, an emotional system, a cognitive system, a relational system, an organizational system, a social, economic, or political system. And we get conflicts precisely at the cracks in those systems. And what are those cracks? They are opportunities to evolve. They are opportunities to develop interest-based solutions that don't require winners and losers. Here, I think, is the fundamental piece. The way that we approach conflict is as a zero-sum game in which there is a winner and a loser. But there are non-zero-sum games, and that is what interests are about. When I mentioned the 3 categories of questions, the first category is essentially a power-based kind of question. The second leads to rights-based types of processes. But the third, the one in which there are multiple correct answers, is an interest-based kind of question. Because if we ask interest-based questions like, what does that mean to you? Or why is that important to you? Or what would you like to see happen? There are potentially an infinite number of answers. And then what we want to do is to design dialogues that help people come together to design what works best for them. And that shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all for everyone. It should be something in which there is flexibility. But notice that we have created a global macroeconomic system that is largely win-lose. Because of the intensity of competition for profits, for individual gain, corporate gain, national gain, we see ourselves pitted against one another. So the question for climate change is, should we agree on a climate target that's going to reduce our macroeconomic prosperity? This is a question for China, for India, for the United States, especially for developing countries, because the developed countries have already used carbon and coal. And now if we're going to cut back on their use, doesn't that freeze you in a hierarchy that is highly competitive, top down, and essentially a zero-sum game in which the wealthy get wealthier and the poor get poorer? That's, I think, the difficulty. So now the question becomes, how do we, and I don't think we have all the answers to this, but the question is, how do we even have a conversation that invites people into a design process where we look at what we can do differently and what the consequences of doing that different thing would be. I think that's the way forward. So first thing we have to do is come up with the right questions, questions that will focus people on values and outcomes, and on the basic fundamental idea that we have the capacity to do better, to design better outcomes that do not result in chronic conflicts. And that's what we are facing economically. Economic inequity is a chronic source of conflict, just as political autocracy is, just as social inequality is, because nobody wants to be treated that way. And therefore, they're going to sooner or later push back. But the idea is, and I wrote about this in the book that Deepak mentioned, called Politics, Dialogue, and the Evolution of Democracy. The idea is to evolve in our social, economic, and political conflicts using conflict resolution and interest-based approaches to try to find solutions that eliminate or prevent or at least reduce chronic conflicts. That's the goal. And I think that is within sight.
Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. The last, we are flooded with questions now, but the last question I'll ask in this session, in the interaction session, and all other questions and clarifications needed will be attended to by us. Ken, the last question to you is, your scholarship, Ken, helps us understand that we do what we do with less theory and more instinct. To what extent do we practitioners need that to imbibe? This is the question by Mr. Rahul Dave.
I'm sorry, to what extent do we, what?
I'll tell the question once again. There's some glitches.
May I just read it for you?
Yeah, please.
Your scholarship can helps us understand that we do what we do with less theory and more instinct. To what extent do we practitioners need that to take our project forward?
I think we need both the theory and the intuition. And the goal of the theory is to allow us to discover forms of practice that are quite helpful. And the goal of the intuition is to access deep knowledge that all of us have. Daniel Kahneman has written a wonderful book called Thinking Fast and Slow. He won the Nobel Prize in economics. And it's about cognitive biases and about the difference between logic and intuition. And there are questions in which logic fails and questions in which intuition fails. So we have two hemispheres of the brain, and we have both logic and intuition for a reason. By combining them, we are able to come up with more successful answers. And this is why conflict is so valuable and important to us. It is like having two eyes because it gives us depth perception. So with two different perspectives, with two different methodologies, we are able to triangulate and see the problem much more clearly. We gain depth as a result of having two. Two creates three. Out of the ability to have alternate ideas, this is why couples are successful. Couples are problem-solving collaboratives because each person, every woman, every man, brings a slightly different perspective. And out of that difference in perspective, we are able to see the conflict differently. So I believe that as practitioners, we need to fundamentally listen to the conflict in a different way, not with the idea of getting rid of it, but once again with the idea of learning from it. And that learning continues to grow. I have never been bored in 40 years and tens of thousands of mediations. Not once have I been bored. And if I do tend to get bored, it means I'm still at the periphery. I have not yet gotten to the center because there's nothing boring at the center. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're muted, Deepak.
Am I audible?
Yes, now you are.
Yeah. So the questions have been hurled to you and you have replied. We are tremendously moved by your replies and very objective replies. But there is no time left. Wish Nivaran invites you for another session so that we can have a lot of questions and answers. And today the closing remarks, the mantle falls on my colleague Asha Madam. So yes, Shantan, you want to say something? Closing remarks by Asha Madam of the entire episode, entire your presentation, and entire the question season. At this moment, thanks to all the questioners, and we'd like to react to that, if not now, in the near future. Thank you. Asha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken, for joining us on this webinar, accepting this invitation on behalf of Nivaran, Mediators of the Supreme Court of India, for delivering this lecture on an important issue, namely how to design, organize, and facilitate dialogues over difficult, divisive, and dangerous issues. You have very aptly informed us about the nature of conflicts and as to what is dialogue in contrast to monologue. That dialogue ends in relationship and not opposition. How to design dialogue is different in different cultures. You have also very aptly informed us. Dialogue produces open minds and hearts. Dialogue assumes that conflict is resolvable by both sides winning. So you have also given us various techniques to encourage dialogue and how to facilitate dialogue by making small groups. How the mediators can help overcome impasse and resolve disputes and thus build a consensus between the rival parties and encourage people to recognize and acknowledge each other's point of view. So we are really thankful for the entire lecture you have given to us. On behalf of entire team Nivaran, Mediators of Supreme Court of India, I thank you, Ken, for accepting this invitation once again to deliver the 10th lecture of the lecture series of Nivaran, despite your extraordinary busy schedule. My colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have all enjoyed this webinar on such an important topic just now delivered by Ken. It is indeed my great pleasure to have him as the guest speaker. I think half an hour is definitely not enough for such a vast topic, which has been aptly summed up by you in limited time. I hope we all have absorbed something or the other from this well-delivered lecture by Ken, which has definitely widened our horizon on mediation. And we would adopt the same while dealing with mediation and conciliation cases. Today, by the lecture of our esteemed guest speaker, new techniques and ideas are learned, new dimensions are imbibed to be followed to facilitate dialogue over difficult, divisive, and dangerous issues in various conciliation and mediation proceedings. I'm sure that we all will benefit with the exchange of our respective field experiences. The element of conciliation and mediation is imbibed in our various laws, including Industrial Disputes Act, our Arbitration and Conciliation Act, etc. The new ideas and techniques would definitely help us in ensuring an increase in the success rate of such conciliation and mediation proceedings. I again thank you for the whole thing. With this, we have come to the end of the program. It has been a wonderful experience to hear our learned guest speaker who painstakingly and concisely listed the various techniques to be adopted in mediation matters. It has been an honor to be among such accomplished and distinguished guests and participants across the world, including our own country. It has been a great pleasure being with all of you today. Thank you. However, before we can call it a day, we cannot just end this program without thanking our entire organizing team of Nivaran, the Supreme Court mediators, without whom this day would not have been possible. We extend our special thanks to Rahul and his newly extended technical team, including Vaibhav, Radhika, and Shubhankar, for providing us the technical support and expertise in organizing this webinar and helping us come together on the platform and successfully conduct this program. Friends, you all know that most of our lecture series have been conducted during pandemic. And I would like to give 100% marks to Rahul, who has given full support in conducting these online lecture series without any technical glitches. I hope Rahul and his new team would collectively continue to extend their unconditional support to us in future also. I express my deep appreciation to all the participants who have taken their time out from their busy schedule to attend this webinar. Before we finally part with this today, please allow me to take the liberty of inviting you all to the next webinar to be organized by Nivaran, the Supreme Court Mediators, when we would be enlightened on a yet new and important topic to be announced shortly. Thank you all for your patience. I wish you all a very, very good evening. Thank you. Goodbye. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Namaskar.
Thank you very much.
Namaskar.
We will be inviting you once